Hello, my friends, and welcome to Theory Hammer, the place where we get theoretical about ham and war and warhams. We do the warham stuff here. So we're gonna start by thanking today's sponsor, which is me. So thank you, Mr. KevBot, for putting this video together, and well, you're welcome. Make sure to power fist the like button and the Nurgle bell icon. Subscribe, leave a comment down below, and check out our other videos. Share them. Do people still share videos? Do all that stuff. Now, guys, gals, I was so excited to be close to 500 subs, and then suddenly, I put out a video that people actually liked. And we totally destroyed 500, and now we're on track to 1,000. So, I don't know what the heck is happening. I don't know. I'm not questioning it. You guys are amazing, and I can't wait to grow the channel together. So, we're doing a little giveaway. It is official, and here is how you enter. To enter the giveaway, leave a comment on any video posted between 12 p.m. on June 29th, 2024, and 11:59 p.m. on July 14th. Duplicate entries are not allowed. This giveaway is solely sponsored by me, the Great KevBot, and has absolutely no affiliation with YouTube whatsoever, up to and including the prize and its distribution. The giveaway will run from June 29th, 2024, at 12 p.m. Eastern Time until 11:59 p.m. on July 13th, 2024. The winner will be selected at 12:01 a.m. on July 14th, 2024 via a random draw. The data collected regarding the winner will be used as a means of contact and nothing further. And when the winner is selected, the description of the last video released during that time frame will be updated with the username of the winner and instructions to contact us via email. The winner will have 1 week from the end of the giveaway to contact us, and they will be expected to go through a manual verification process to prove that they are the owner of the account and the actual winner, which will also be communicated via the email exchange. The winner will select one of the following prizes: 1 Leagues of Votann Sagitaur, 1 Adeptus Sororitas Paragon Warsuit box, 1 Adeptus Custodes Allarus Custodian box, 1 Tau Crisis Battlesuit box, 1 Space Marine Redemptor Dreadnought, 1 Deathwatch Corvus Blackstar box, 1 Death Guard Plagueburst Crawler box, 1 World Eater 8-bound box, 1,000 Sun Rubric Marine box, 1 Eldar Wraith Guard box, 1 Black Templar Sword Brethren box, 1 Astra Militarum Rogal Dorn box, 1 Chaos Demon Soul Grinder box, 1 Imperial Knight Armiger Warglaive box, 1 Chaos Knight War Dog box, 1 Death Company with Jump Pack box, Chaos Space Marine Accursed Cultist box, 1 Drukhari Icubi box, 1 Genestealer Cult Achilles Ridge Runner box, 1 Grey Knight Nemesis Dreadnought box, 1 Necron Wraith box, 1 Ork Killa Kan box, 1 Space Wolf Thunderwolf Cavalry box, and 1 Tyrannid Haruspex box. If I didn't say 1 for any of those items, you can only get one of them. You pick one of those boxes. The description for the giveaway is in the video description. Thanks as always, and good luck. So, you humans ready to immerse yourselves in the best Warhammer 40k edition? I will preface this absolutely glowing review of 8th edition and GW to say that it did have its problems, like all editions, namely with 2 army builds, the rule of 3, things like that. So let's just first take a moment, and we'll just give a moment of silence for 7th edition. May it rest in tiny little shattered shards locked away in different pocket dimensions forever. Okay, so up until this point, at least when I started playing, the game was just not the same as 8th edition. Like, there was a weird ass AP system, and so like every edition before 8th was like this. You had a weird AP system, like vehicles were just not regular models and used a completely different set of mechanics to interact with them. Like, everything had 1 wound except for like characters and a few things. The characters themselves could attach and detach from units. The strength and toughness chart was like this massive, ridiculous chart. Like, it was crazy. And so while the editions back then did change, the core rules and mechanics stayed the same. It's like the aforementioned things remained the same. So remember from the 7th edition video where GW was seeing lower and lower profits every year and were just generally disliked? They went from good editions to 6th edition, which was just a massive piece of shit. And then to 7th edition, which was just like clown car extremo version of the game. And by then, 4-ish years had passed and like people were like, the direction of this game and this company is fucked. And so GW, they saw the writing on the wall and they changed. And this was coupled with the fact that the leadership at GW changed during the transition from 7th to 8th. And so they knew that something had to change, something had to give. And they changed, not only as a company, but they changed the game in a way that just about everyone loved. Like, not everyone, but let's just say that GW's profits started skyrocketing again during this period. So how were these changes so drastic? Well, let's first talk about the changes to the game. So blast templates, flamer templates, all types of templates were removed. Let's give them a moment of silence as well, because I fucking loved blast templates. So doing this removed discrepancies from the game, just made it a bit faster. You didn't have to like try to sit there and figure out how many models you were hitting and then roll that many dice. You just roll a dice now, that's how many shots you get. So it's a bit faster now. Models gained wounds, a lot of wounds. Weapons gained damage, like kind of how it is now. AP was overhauled and became what I said it always should be since I started playing, which is a reduction to your armor value, not like an all or nothing thing. Vehicles became actual models with a toughness and wounds like everything else. Combat was different in a way I'm not going to be able to quickly describe, so I'll just move on to strength and toughness. It had a much more simple chart, like the one that we know today. Characters could no longer attach to units, but they also couldn't be targeted, so it was basically the same thing. Mortal wounds became a thing. Heavy weapons could be moved and shot at -1 to hit. I think that was still back like that in 8th. And many, many other things. And so those are some of the game changes, which in and of itself are just absolutely massive. But the next thing to change was the complication of the rules. One of my biggest highlights of 8th edition was that it was simple. There were 8 pages of rules, not including like missions and stuff like that, but how 2 models could interact on the table, 8 pages of rules. And I gotta say, having 8 pages of rules makes the game a lot more accessible to new people, which was also part of GW's plan in this edition. At least I assume. I mean, hell, I was even able to teach my girlfriend at the time how to play. And just to make sure that doesn't come off wrong, and it has nothing to do with intelligence, it's simply that, like any girlfriend I did have who was interested in 40k, they weren't interested enough to learn 50 pages of rules. So the point is that it was finally approachable for people who like otherwise scoffed at the idea of like grinding through a lot of pages of rules before you even got to get any models. I had someone in the comments ask me about 1-page rules, and I have scanned it, although I haven't played it. It does seem like it would be fun, and just reading it, it looks pretty cool, but considering how complicated of a game Warhammer 40k is, having 8 pages of rules is pretty damn good. And I actually took a lot of inspiration from this. I've been creating my own tabletop wargame for the last several years, and the section on how 2 models can interact between moving, shooting, combat, all that, about 10 pages. It's a little bit less, so I don't have more info to tell you guys more, at least yet. More specifically, I don't want to, but one day I will. I basically just looked at what GW was doing, and I mentally quoted Zorg from The Fifth Element and said, "You want something done? Do it yourself." So yeah, it's awesome and makes way more sense in every single way in the sense of trying to like emulate combat on a tabletop. But I digress. Enough about the game I'm making that I'm keeping a secret. GW knew it needed to change and actually show the community that it was going to be responsive to problems. They knew that if they didn't respond to issues that they would end up putting their reputation on the line again, and it was unclear with other shit editions being so fresh on the mind if GW could really afford to behave that way. So not only did they overhaul their game and make it much more accessible, they also changed how they responded to the community, which was another thing that I remember being vastly different than before. GW decided it was time to listen to the community, and oh my, how the community loved them for it, me included. They really turned their reputation around during this time. They made a clear effort to address issues that were plaguing the competitive scene. They addressed strats that were too strong. They addressed army rules that were too strong. They addressed units that were too strong, like Celestine being Cancer in the beginning. They addressed builds that were too strong, like with the introduction of the Rule of 3, and among many other things. And all the things that we wished they would do in the past, they were finally fucking doing. It's like when you break up with someone that you love, but because of their behavior, you just can't be with them anymore. And then they go ahead and they actually change and actually make like a clear effort to show people around them that they don't want to be the person they used to be, and like they actually aren't anymore. 8th edition was not perfect, and it did have its problems, which we will get to, but that's the vibe that GW gave us. Like, personally, I thought about GW with complete disdain in 6th and 7th edition, and like the egregiously obvious predatory marketing and direction that the company was heading. And so my expectation was just that they would continue doing shitty things into 8th edition and beyond. But I'm also generally not the type of person that just totally writes someone off. So GW came back to me, no longer disheveled, head held high, and said, "I'm different now. and I want to give you the opportunity to prove it to you. So like, they really made a valiant effort to change their behavior and to show the community through action that they were willing to change. And so we moved to the release of 8th edition. And the first notable thing that GW did was create indexes, just like with 10th edition. And this was the first time that GW ever put out indexes with the release of an edition. Like, older editions did have like stats for everything from every faction, but this wasn't quite like that. Like, this was an entire rules and data sheets for everything. Imperium got an index. Xenos got an index. Chaos got an index. I think there were actually like 4 or 5 indexes even. So like 2 of them were broken in half. There was probably Chaos, Chaos Demons, Imperium, and then Imperium 2. And that was amazing for players. This was like the great reset. There was like every single faction in the game now had a level playing field. No more were the days of having a codex that was 2 editions old and barely functioning with the current rules. Like, hard reset the game. Like, GW used the nuclear option here and just totally changed everything. So like, imagine this. I'm playing Necron from 3rd edition. 4th edition comes out. The entire edition plays out. I still have a 3rd edition codex. 5th edition comes out, and the entire edition plays out. And at the very end of 5th edition, I finally get a new codex. But now we're on to 6th edition, and I'm not going to get another new codex for a while, because historically speaking, I don't get it for like 3 editions. And so the problem was that these old and even newer codexes were just simply not compatible with the new rules, and so absolutely everything in the game had to be completely ripped out and replaced, and there was really no other choice than to just do it all at once. There was no way that any of the 7th edition codexes would have been applicable to 8th edition rule set. Like, they just simply weren't compatible. Like me and Amy. Like, sorry Amy, we're better off. So we get indexes. And wouldn't you know it, just about every single unit for every single faction had some place and some use in the new version of the game. I cannot tell you how many units were left behind in old editions. Like, a codex would come out, a unit would just be bad, and no one would use it for the entire edition, and GW didn't sell any of it. And because they did not have like a regular update schedule at the time, that was just the way it was. 50% of your codex was just unfucking usable at the competitive level up until 8th edition. And this didn't remain true, like, to be crystal clear about that. But before we start getting into codexes and revamped missions from Frontline and Nova, like, every unit was usable in some way. That did change with missions because some units just have more utility than others, and they're just strictly better at achieving certain things. But GW did start having a more regular update schedule here, so units did kind of rotate a bit, albeit like slowly, and this was great. Units on my shelf that sucked suddenly became good. The meta was not stagnated on a few good units from a few good factions. Now, there were still like bad units or like similar units with similar roles that were strictly better, like I said, but overall, generally speaking, pretty much every unit had a place. And then separately from those changes, Games Workshop made that huge effort to take grievances seriously, and they took feedback to heart. When it became apparent that there was an issue in the meta, GW tried to fix it. They did this with Celestine pretty early on. I don't remember what Celestine did back then. I know, I should, but I don't remember exactly. But I remember that she could take an objective and just fly the fuck away with it. Like, I don't remember how they changed her. But they did this with like introducing the rule of 3. They nerfed Ynnari. They did this by nerfing the Castellans. Like, they were finally putting in effort, much like they do now. However, like, these were simpler times for Games Workshop. GW in this edition had not yet figured out how to like exploit their updates to make more money. This was solely like GW sees an issue, GW fixes the issue. There was no clear motivation here for them to use this system as a means to sell more models like we see in 10th. Now ultimately, it did serve to increase GW's profits by a couple of means, or at least one. When GW fixed an issue, it caused people to go out and like go back to their list, rewrite them, potentially pick up like new different models, like something we see a lot in 10th. But I don't think that GW saw this as a way to coerce people into getting other models. It was more just a byproduct of that. GW is more kind of like, oh shit, there's an issue in the meta, we gotta act, we gotta fix it before our reputation is ruined again, and everyone hates us for making insane shit and not fixing it. And so, since we have been comparing the editions to 10th, 8th edition was another peak, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately, because when there's a peak, there's always a fall. Let's just do a little comparison between 8th edition and 10th edition and how GW tries to sell models to its customers. So when 8th happened, so many units became viable again, and right off the bat, sales rose. GW was in an in-between period wherein they had not yet figured out how to use balanced data slates to push models and products. So for 8th edition, it was mainly just a release schedule and some updates that kept people buying. But being a GW rebirth, this was basically all we got here, like just a normal marketing strategy where things were completely overhauled and now there's like a new thing basically. And so people were incentivized to buy a whole bunch of new models because so many different things got changed and became good or were then useful. And then that in addition to their normal release schedule to get people buying new models and new factions and that kind of stuff as they normally do. And then further, actually putting out updates for the first time, showing their customers that they actually cared about the balance of the game and the negativity that imbalance actually caused. It's like, hey, they're actually trying to fix, X issue. I respect that, GW. I'm gonna stick with you, keep it up. And so that was kind of the mentality of people. And so really, it was a lot of goodwill and just straight normalcy that brought GW back during this edition. Yes, prices went up, as always, which is fucking bullshit, but things returned to a sense of normal in terms of a company that kind of gave a shit about its customers and about its products and about a meta that it created and that it wasn't wildly out of control. And there were some crazy things, which we will get into, but at least we weren't fucking rock-bending L-shaped ruins around the table and then like rotating them and then trying to figure out where the fuck all the models that were partially touching it would have ended up. Like, our issues here are internal ones, which is that some units were too strong for their points. An issue that I've always had, will always have. Game design is hard. What can I say? Like, you write a rule expecting a certain result, and someone clever finds a way to exploit it in a way that you didn't consider when developing. And that's where the balance change comes in. As I've said in basically every other video thus far, in 10th edition, we have a wild release schedule coupled with balance changes that are just sometimes so significant, we basically enter into a new edition, like we have with the most recent balanced data slate in June 2024. This is how GW makes money in 10th. During 8th, GW screwed its head on straight and acted like a normal game company that got people interested with new releases. People were so much more willing to give them their money when they saw that GW was actively trying to correct things that players identified as problems. But we're going to explore how that system became more corrupt in our video in 9th edition. But during 8th edition, things were going about as well as they could for a company that had like 24 supported factions at the time. Maybe not even been that many, but 20 plus. And so we're going to move on to why 8th edition was so memorable, at least for me. First of which, of course, was the core rules being just entirely different than any other edition that came before it. Like, this was a new game. It was still Warhammer, mostly, but nothing like Warhammer of old. This in and of itself was just real memorable for me because it was just such a shock. It was a vastly different rule set. It's easy to forget changes from edition to edition, like little changes here and there that kind of tweak things. It's easy to forget those things since the core rules kind of operate the same way, but not with 8th edition. Like, top to bottom, this edition was just a complete overhaul. And once we started playing it, it became clear very quickly that this was a good rule set, and it was one of the best, in fact. The edition changed so much, like, it's hard to list off all the things that changed and what made them memorable. Like, I almost think of this edition as edition 1 in like a new age of 40k. This edition just got so many things right. Like, vehicles were like any other model, albeit, vastly more wounds, much higher toughness. But the AP change, damage on weapons, like those are some of the most memorable things for me because we never had that kind of stuff in older editions. And the way that AP works now was introduced in 8th. And it just makes sense. Like, right, any amount of AP should, subtract from your armor, make your armor worse. And like a big tank weapon should do more damage than a bolter, and so weapons have a damage profile to kind of go hand in hand with the increase of wounds on models. And I think that missions also peaked during this time. At this point, basically every LGS adopted the mission formats from LVO or from Nova, and the game was just very enjoyable to play, and the missions would vary based on the matchup. And a lot of the time, your opponent's army was built to deny secondaries as well. So then it became hard to pick secondaries, and the game became a lot more tit for tat because you and your opponent hopefully had optimized lists where neither person could really get a leg up on secondaries because you built your army to kind of deny them. Now, but that all being said, all of these peaks, there were some bad things about 8th edition that I can remember. And if you guys can think of anything others, which I am sure you can, remind me down below. So at first, list building, Wild West. And there were some factions that could ally and some that couldn't. And so you kind of had a little bit of imbalance there. there was no rule of 3 until later on in the edition, and this caused some really dumb lists, like Gulliman with 5 Storm Ravens, 6 Flyrants, which I think won LVO. I'm pretty sure Nick won LVO, or somebody won LVO, with like 6 Flyrants, 6 Plagueburst Crawlers, just like 6 whatever, like shit like that. I remember Eldar Flyer Spam being a thing, especially like in the first year or 2 of the edition. Maybe not quite 2, but their flyers were basically impossible to hit if you played as Alatok, because they were like -3 to hit. And so you basically just couldn't hit them, and they just flew around, pivoting twice, killing everything. And I also remember Ynnari, because I used to play them. But Ynnari weren't on anyone's radar when the edition first came out, because off of the backs of 7th edition, every single unit could do a Death Act thing. When 8th edition came out, you could only do 1 Death Act thing per turn. And so I think everybody was like, damn, I can't do the same action twice, drop, and then like just forgot they existed. And then our good old recurring friend in these videos, Nick Nanavati, he created the Ynnari list that was very, very strong, and he won LVO with it. And then people started to pay attention, and naturally I was like, oh, well, that's OP, I guess I'm gonna play that. So, because sometimes I can't resist the cancer, you know? The other kind of cancery thing that I remember was the Castellan Knight with Imperial Guard and Blood Angel allies. This shit won Nova like 3 years in a row, dude. Like, including after it was nerfed. So while Ynnari had their time to shine, they struggled against this list unless you like really knew how to pilot the Eldar army. And we'll get into lists a little bit later. And so for me, some of the most memorable things that I can remember have to do with the lists that I would run and why I was running them at the time. Like personally, remembering army lists and games with those lists and like silly things that happened in those games when I think back to older editions, that's really what I reminisce on. There are other memorable things that happen in every edition, but for me, it's really playing the game, building the lists, and then like the sprinklings of events surrounding 40k in that edition, you know, the experience of going to LVO or Nova. So I'll run you guys through some of those lists that I used to run and some of the other crazy ones that were out there during this edition. Overall, I remember playing Tau for a while, and I'll get into that super memorable Nova experience with it in a second. But then I switched to Orks because Eldar flyers were a thing, and tractor cannons auto-hit flyers. Anything with the fly keyword, they just auto-hit, and they made them auto-explode if they were a vehicle. So, Orks, dude, they had the most insane shit back then. Like, the shock attack gun could shoot twice, be re-rolling hits. It did, like, D3 mortals for each hit, in addition to other damage, and had, like, sustained 1 with crit 5-ups, and it could shoot twice, and it was 75 points. And you couldn't target it because it was a character in 8th edition. It was fucking nuts. This list was so fucking fun if you played it right and you knew what it could do. And while I'm on the topic, the year that I took this to Nova, unfortunately, I wasn't able to play all 8 rounds. I carpooled with my team, and the guys who were in the top 16 after day 3 lost their second games, and so no one wanted to play anymore, and everyone wanted to leave, and no one was going top 16 at that point. So these fuckers were like, I'm out, and just dragged me along, kicking and screaming that I was going to win my bracket again. And my opponent and I knew each other, and we both agreed that I just won that game. Now, I could be thinking of Ynnari, where I got dragged out because my teammates didn't go top 16. I could be thinking of the year I went with Ynnari, but I'm pretty sure it was with Orks. So then I switched to Ynnari because, of course I did. And y'all will be happy to know, and you can feel free to go ahead and make fun of me because I was one of those try-hard Eldar players for a good while there, up until I really got a handle on them. I remember going to Nova with Ynnari at one point with a very positive win rate against my teammates. Performed like total dog shit while all of them went top 16 with the same list that I was kicking their asses with. And I just remember being very disappointed with myself that year. But I kept with Ynnari, and I kept playing them up until basically the end of the year. The Ynnari list was like super fucked though. It could only do each death action once a turn, but that was quite enough to totally break someone's back. So like, only 1 unit could shoot twice. Only 1 unit could move twice. Only 1 unit could swing twice. And so what I remember from the list was that it had 2 units of Shining Spears, 3 units of Dark Reapers, so there were 2 3-man units and 1 9-man unit. I believe I had Eldrad. I had a Farseer, I had Yevrain, 3 units of Rangers, like 5 Rangers, a Warlock on a bike, and like 2 Wave Serpents. There may have been like another thing or two, but that was basically it. And so what this did is Yavi would cast like the do a death action thing on the unit of Reapers, and they would just immediately shoot something dead. Then they would shoot something dead again in my shooting phase, and then use Fire and Fade to go back behind a wall. So real fun stuff for my opponent. And like the shoot again power was like, it cast on a 5, and she was like Yavi is like +1 to her psychic tests in this edition. And I think they changed it to like a 6 or a 7, but even then it was still reliable to get off because you could just get it off on a 6. And so then we have the Farseer saying, hey, Shining Spears that can advance and charge, go ahead and move again. And so they would move up, shoot a ton of guns and kill something, charge something and kill it, and then immediately just get to move back behind a wall. So like other Psychers in the army would do things like Doom, Guide, Jinx, like make your armor worse, make my shit reroll hits and wounds, and yeah. Shooting a unit of Dark Reapers with full rerolls to hit and wound twice, and then moving behind a wall was a thing. Along with like a unit of Shining Spears that like in the same turn shot like 6 or 7, I guess it would have been 7 Strength 6 AP4 2 damage spears, and then 32 twin-linked shuriken shots at you, and then charged you and killed something dead, and then moved back like 16 inches behind a wall. Maybe you could deal with that unit of spears the next turn with what you had left, but I had a backup unit. And after shitting the bed at Nova with it, I did continue to use it until I became very good with it. Like I remember I played Sasha at another GT later in the year, who by the way, just came in second at ACO this year, and who runs through people playing Eldar, because believe it or not, it actually requires skill to play. And I remember playing it so perfectly that I literally did not need to use my second unit of Shining Spears. I kept them on the table in the backfield the entire game. Like I remember I didn't deep strike them this game. Now I do need to recognize here that my list was just simply better than his on paper, but Sasha is one of those players who will slap you even if you have a good list because he is that good of a player. He's probably one of the best players in the country. He's much better than I am. So Sasha, if you're watching this, you're the man. Congrats on your second place win at ACO. Someone tag Sasha, would you? And then tag Justin Cook, because now it's story time. Now I think I did partially mention this in my 10th edition video, but I'm going to go into some more detail here. So in 8th edition, when it drops, I'm like, hey team, I suck, what do I run? And my good friend Dan is like, you're stupid because you have the best army sitting on your shelf over there, and points to my Tau army. And we sit down and we start writing a list, and he's telling me why it's dumb, and I'm like, yep, this is dumb, this is the call. So I'm getting ready for Nova, and I'm all excited and shit, and wouldn't you know it, my job doesn't allow me to have off the Friday when the first 3 games happen. And upon finding this out, I contacted the Nova guys and I asked them if it would be acceptable for me to play in the GT, but just take a triple loss on day 1 because I couldn't make it. And they did graciously accept that offer, and so I was able to play, and that's what happened. So I get there Friday night, Saturday morning, I'm down playing my first game, and Justin Cook, who's a friend of mine and a multi-time Nova winner, walks over to me, doesn't even say anything, and I just start rambling about how I wasn't allowed to play on day 1 because of work, and like they let me take 3 losses so I could play in the GT, and Justin realizes what's happening at this point, and he looks at me and smiles. He just looks down at my army on the table and then just looks up at me again and just starts laughing and goes, you're an asshole, and he just starts laughing and walk away. And it was all in good fun. Like, he was just like, I feel bad for these bottom bracket players, because he understood the situation. Like, he knows that, like, I'm not a bad player. I'm not amazing. I'm not fucking Nick Nadavati or you know, Jack Harpster or anything, but I'm not, like, a fucking scrub. And so he knows, like, and he just got a kick out of it like I did, because he and I both knew that I was gonna crash through these players like a fucking meteor, and that's exactly what happened. I didn't lose a single game after day 1, and I ended up ending the GT with a 5-3 record despite going, just like accepting 3 losses on day 1. And so let me run you through why my list was so fucky and why Justin just couldn't help but laugh once he saw what was happening. So remember that rule of 3? Yeah, that wasn't a thing yet. So, not joking, my entire fucking army was battlesuit commanders with gun drones. I had like 70 fucking drones and like 15 commanders with missile pods or cyclics. Remember how I said leaders could not be targeted in this edition? Yeah. You couldn't target my entire army, and it just shot you to death in 3 turns. 1 or 2 of those commanders had a drone controller, which was like an aura back then that gave all the drones around them like within 6 inches +1 to hit. So now they're all hitting on 4s, Oh, and my entire army overwatches because everything is within 6 inches of literally everything else, and I'm Tau in 8th edition, so I overwatch on fucking 5-ups. It's like, trying to keep track of those drones was a nightmare, dude. Even after I color-coded them, like, there aren't enough fucking colors, and I'm not even kidding. Each commander, and it may not even have been like 15, I don't actually remember, I think it was like closer to 9 commanders, but each one of them had 2 drones, and then the rest of my army was units of drones. There was no rule of 3, so I had like legit 20 different units of drones that all had to be different colors, and some of them were like 2-man rando units that detached from the commanders, so like, no rule of 3. So I had legit like 20 units of fucking drones that all had to be different colors, and some of them were just like 2 rando dudes from a unit because that they just detached from the character because all the characters are like 3-inch lone ops in this edition. So it was just a goddamn nightmare. But yeah, I blasted through everyone that I played. Some of these games were so short that I don't even remember what happened. Like the last game that I played was against Krons, and I lost like 20 drones and tabled him. That's what like every game was like in this bracket. And I'm not proud about it either. Like I felt bad, like legitimately. Like I'm not the best player, like I keep saying, but I know when I'm clubbing a baby seal. And frankly, there's no challenge in it. Neither person learns anything. And so I kind of felt bad after every game, like I was cheating. Like I don't know. It didn't feel like I was the top dog or anything. Like it was quite the opposite. It was embarrassing. Like I kind of felt like it was unfair, sincerely. Like if the organizers were like, we want to put you in a higher bracket, I'd be like, please do. Please do. Like I'd rather lose to a good player than just careen through less skilled players. When I intentionally play less skilled players, it's for coaching. But anyway, it is what it is. I annihilated that bracket, and then I switched over to Eldar. So with Ynnari. So then after Ynnari caught another nerf, or something else happened, I began playing AdMech. And it was probably because, funny enough, the Pariah Nexus book that came out, at least I think it was a book, but point is, AdMech got some silly nonsense in that book, specifically an aura of sustained hits 1 on everything, plus full rerolls to hit from call. I straight annihilated people with this list as well, but I didn't have the chance to bring it to any big events or anything. I actually remember the last event that I did go to at the very end of 8th, I played my AdMech list and I had the highest battle points despite losing I lost my last game, high at losing score, and I ended up having the most battle points still. Now, to get more specific about some of the cancer before we get out of here, let's have a talk about the Castellan. The Castellan would one-shot 2 completely separate units every turn, and there was nothing you could do about it unless you had another Castellan and you went first. You couldn't engage this thing because it was surrounded by an entire Imperial Guard army, and I'm talking like 120 infantrymen, 3 Hellhounds, 3 Sentinels, except that wasn't everything. You then had 3 Blood Angel Smash Captains, and this was just not easy to charge because the Smash Captains would just countercharge you in their turn and fuck you all up. So, and the way this army worked originally had a lot to do with gaining CP, because back then in this edition, you could stack CP generation stuff and you could literally gain more CP than you spent when you used a strat. So this knight would be walking around with a 3-up invulnerable save and reroll 1s on everything. And I mean everything. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. 1s for the number of shots, 1s for damage, 1s for hits, 1s for wounds. Any 1s, you just rerolled it. And this goddamn thing had like 6 D3 shots from its shoulder guns, 2 D6 shots from its plasma cannon, D6 shots from its volcano cannon, and like terrain was different. So if this thing saw you, this thing fucking killed you. It would go volcano cannon at one thing, everything else at another, 2 dead targets. And it would just sit on objectives, like the army would just sit on objectives and accumulate points the entire game. And that is something that I also do sorely miss from this edition, the concept of choosing your primary mission. As you should all know at this point, if you've been following the channel, I fucking hate 9th and 10th edition missions, like to my core. I would rather there be some sort of system where my opponent and I can both choose which primary we go for, which would allow for like different list building, because like if I'm not forced to put my units into places where they're guaranteed to die, then I can play the game differently while you do something like accumulate points. Like I'd rather systematically dismantle your army throughout the course of the game by outplaying you and outpositioning you and be rewarded for doing that. And I know, that is a part of the game in 9th and 10th edition, but anyone who doesn't understand what I mean when I'm talking about the difference between choosing to put a unit somewhere and being forced to put a unit somewhere, aka like be on an objective at the start of your command phase to get points, needs Jesus. All right. So overall, the edition was just a ton of fun. There were so many fun lists going around, even after things did get balanced. It was just such a nice change of pace to see GW actively communicating with its customers and the community. GW created a really simple, compact rule set that also allowed for good strategy. And I really miss this edition, or at least the way the game was played in the edition. But we saw a real turnaround from Games Workshop here, and I commend them for taking such decisive action and for changing course. Their sales started going up again, they really started to prosper during this time. It's not hard to see why either. When the company shows that it's willing to listen to the community rewards them. It's pretty simple. They were not using balance schedules to help push models either, so it was just a lot of their behavior changed, and it was really apparent that they wanted to show the community goodwill. My worry now is that GW is beginning to slide again. We see balance updates that massively change the entire game, which causes players to do one of two things: chase the meta and buy more models, or reconsider if they want to play this game competitively anymore. The changes that happen now, in my opinion, happen too quickly. Like, I really wish GW would create a core rule set that never changed, like Magic. I would want them to errata things over time, of course, but I would want the rules themselves to stay the same. After some time, we would get to a place where things would indeed be pretty balanced if we just left the core rule set the same for several years. It might take years, but it would be doable. But that will never happen, because the changing and the rollover of editions and codexes is a major part of the way that GW makes money. But am I crazy here? Am I the only one who wishes that we could just land on an edition, assuming it was really good, permanently, with tweaks as needed up until it was quite balanced? Let me know down below. And that is going to do it, my dear theorists, for this dive into 8th edition. If there is anything that I missed, which there is, please leave it down below in the comments. Plus, doing that will enter you into the giveaway anyway. So, thunderhammer that like button, baby. Subscribe, touch Nurgle's bell, check out our other videos as well. I did not intend that to rhyme, but it did. So check out our other videos. We make content regularly. And I'm gonna warp my way out of here and go mourn the loss of my beloved 8th edition. So until next time, theorists, may the Emperor protect, or blood for the blood god, or whatever. End transmission.